on that, or you guys are welcome to send me an email with suggestions for future workshops. There's my email. And we will get started. Alright, can everybody see my screen? Okay. Currently, I have a project that, like I said before, my project for before was already up. For some reason, Unity doesn't automatically open a new project or give you an option for opening projects or creating new projects by default. So it usually opens up the last project you were in, and you have to switch projects or create a new project. That's all done. I'll close this for a minute. That's all done up here. You just click on File, New Project, Open Project, or Save Project. In this case, we're going to do a new project, and I'm going to just save it in my documents, and we're going to call it Shooter, because that's basically what it is. Now, the big important difference between 4.3 and the other versions is that you have a set of defaults for this little area right here. Let me know if it's moving too fast or you can't see what I'm talking about, because sometimes the rendering is a little slow on the share screen. You want to click on this as a drop-down window, and you want to select 2D for creating 2D projects using the native tools of Unity. Now, we won't be using any additional add-ons. Everything we're going to be using today will be features of 2D, of the actual Unity package. Now, we will be applying some images and stuff, and that will come from the tutorial that you can see on the link above our names, or above the chat log. Alright, now we're not going to select anything here, we're just going to add these as we need them, if we need them. And I'll show you how to import packages after a project's already been made. So we're just going to create our project. Okay, and of course it wants to whine, so I have to tell it to try again. Okay, now everybody's console are sometimes set up differently. This is the default layout. If you need to change your layout or switch back to factory, you can do that also over here in this layout drop. There's a default, which is what we were just in. You got a 2x3 where it splits everything up like this, so you have a game window, a scene window, your hierarchy, project, and the inspector. And all of these will make more sense as we work through the tutorial, explaining all these scenes. Now, I do know that Dan Alessi is planning a workshop that, has a workshop set up that is going to explain all the little features and bells and whistles of Unity. So I'm willing to bypass a lot of those features. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them, and we'll try to cover them as we go. So I'm going to put this back on our default split. Okay. A few shortcut keys. We're going to talk about a few shortcut keys that move you around. Now, I don't know about everybody else, but I really like shortcut keys. They make my job a lot easier when I'm coding. I don't have to pick my mouse up and move things around as much. In Unity, because of the environment, you probably will still use the mouse a lot, so shortcut keys might not be as important to you. But here are a quick few ones for while you're editing. Control C, Control X, and Control V work like copy, cut, and paste, just like they do in most of the other programs. Control Z will undo your last action, and Control Y will redo your last action, or your last cut. Control D will duplicate an object. If you have an object and you make multiple copies of it, you can use Control D and it will make copies. Shift Delete is what you use to actually delete an object from the hierarchy, or you can right click and delete, that kind of thing. F will center the selected item into our scene. It'll frame it and center it in the selection. Control F will bring up a find menu so you can find objects, especially if you get into a bigger project and you have a lot of objects in your hierarchy. Control A obviously selects everything. Control P can be used to play the game, a lot like when you're in Visual Studios and you press F5 to start debugging. Control P will be the method to start playing the game. Control Shift P will make it pause, and Control Alt P will make it step through code when you get into that stage. That's those are some really important ones that I thought were kind of important. There are several other shortcut keys available. Any questions at this moment? I lose Tina already? Is everybody still with me? Okay. So no questions so far? That's alright, yo. Alright, so we'll move on. We'll get started now. We're actually going to start stepping through the tutorial. Now, like I said, the tutorial is available. The link is underneath, above our names. It says the tutorial side-scrolling shooter. You can click on that and open it up, and you can kind of follow through with me if you want as we go through it. I am going to skip a lot of the wording as I go through, but we will discuss some of the stuff as we go. So first off, we'll go back into the scene here. It's important to note that there are different... I don't know why they didn't give us our folders. Typically, there's folders already available when you look at a project. Under assets, there's usually some extra folders that are pre-created of prefabs, scenes, scripts, sounds, and textures. We'll probably just have to add those as we need them. Prefabs are reusable game objects. You create a prefab and then you can just keep making copies of it during gameplay. They're kind of like classes. They're treated a lot like classes when you're programming, where you constantly reuse them over and over again. The scene is our level, so what you see right here with this camera in the center, this is a display of our scene, which currently has nothing in it but a camera. The scene is basically our level. This is every time you'd make a new level, you'd make a new scene. Alright. They have to be saved individually, manually saved. If you make changes to a scene and forget to save it, it's not gonna be there. If you make a change, if you save it, then it's going to be permanently saved. It's one of those things that's a little harder to deal with than sending it back and forth. So it's really important to stay on top of your scene and know what you've done and what you've not done. Sounds, obviously that's different sounds. Scripts is where we'll put our code that we're going to use to interact with our projects. In this case, in this tutorial, we're going to be using C# scripts. Unity supports 3 types of script. Type of JavaScript, which has been termed Unity script, C#, and Boo. Now, most people have not even ever heard of Boo, so we're not even going to discuss it. You will have to research that in your Unity classes, so take a moment sometime and look it up. Basically, it's a type of Python scripting. So if you're familiar with Python, then you might be familiar with them. Textures are basically going to be your skins, your sprites, the graphic images that you use throughout the game. So, with that in mind, we're going to start working with things. Okay, each object in the scene is called a game object. You can create an object on the root of the scene or as a child of another game object. You can move an object at any time to change its parents, and we'll show you some of that as we go through the tutorial. Um, if you're following along with me in on the website, they give you a little image of kind of how that would look, where you can see an object and it has 3 children underneath it that are called level. Under level, you see 0 background, 1 middle ground, and 2 foreground. Those are examples of objects with child objects. You can actually create empty objects. Empty objects trick Unity into creating a space to use for different things, such as scripts or such in your game. And you can use it as a folder for other game objects, like bullets or prefabs or anything else that you may need to add into your game as you go. It's a good idea to make sure that any empty game object is set at 0, 0, 0. The reason for this is that, and I'm not sure they're going to explain it here, but the reason for that is that any child you put into a parent object will also inherit all of the parent's aspects. So say if the parent is at 1, 1, 1, so 1x, 1y, 1z, and the child is at 1, 1, 1, when you place the child into the parent, it's actually going to move the child to 2, 2, 2, which is 1, 1, 1 away from the parent object. So if your parent object is not at 0, 0, 0, especially for empty objects, then your other objects, when you change your x, y, and z's, you're going to have to change it based on where the empty object is located, not the true true x, y, and z pivot points. Is everybody still with me? Oh, it looks like I got a new person. Welcome, Joe. If you already have Unity installed, that's fine. If you already have Unity installed, just make sure it's at 4.3, because we're going to be discussing the 2D tools that are inherited into Unity 4.3. We're not going to be working with any additional assets. We're just going to be using the 2D tools that are available with the release of 4.3. If you want to follow along, the tutorial we're going to be working with, the tutorial we're going to be working with is up above, and the Unity links is called The Tutorial, side-scrolling shooter. Thanks to some people at Pixel Nest, they provided us with a tutorial that walks through the methods of doing that. And apparently someone clicked on the download the top one and because it opened up the window on me. That's alright. Alright. Okay, the first thing we're going to do, we're going to start building up our we're going to start building up our scene. And right now we're about halfway through the first part of the tutorial called Installing Unity and Creating Your First Scene. So first off, we're going to need to create 3 empty objects. So we're going to go to Game Object up here at the top, and we're going to create empty. We're going to name our first game object scripts. And basically we'll add all of our global scripts into this game object. We're going to create another game object here, and we're going to call it render. We're going to actually move the camera here and any other lights and objects like that inside here. So we're going to actually move our camera. So we're going to click on the camera here, and we're going to move that to render. So now we have now we have the parent-child aspect. And then we're going to create one more empty game object, and we're going to call it level. All right. Now we're going to add 3 empty game objects inside level. And we're going to do the same thing. You create an empty object, and then we're just going to move it into level. So we can go ahead and make all 3 of our all 3 of our game objects. Alright, sorry. Apparently I lost my connection. Everybody's still there? Yep. It for some reason it's been doing this a lot lately. Can everybody see my screen now? Typically when it does it to me, it's I pop out for a little bit and then I come back in. Okay, so where did I lose everybody? All your X, Y, and Z variables in your empty classes or empty game objects should be set to 0, 0, 0. Not the main camera. Leave the camera's position alone for now. The camera is not an empty object. We're just talking about empty objects right now. Okay? So let's see. Now I was making some more more game objects. We're going to make them 0 background. Not create empty object. We're going to call it 1 middle ground. And you'll find the purpose for this as we go. Or you'll see the purpose for this as we go. And we're going to create one more, and it'll be 2 foreground. Okay, and it didn't save the name. I want to also rename this one because it didn't give me my spacing the way it's supposed to. Okay, now all 3 of these objects, and you can highlight more than one object. In this case, I used Shift and moved my arrow. And we're going to put all 3 of these objects under level. So that we've got level as an empty parent, and then we've got 3 children that are empty as well. And if you can see, all their positions are 0, 0, 0 for every empty child or every empty project item. Render 0 and script is 0. That way, when we move stuff around on the scene, we'll be able to do it more effectively. At this point, we're going to go ahead and save the scene, and we can save it whatever we want to. But in this case, we're just going to give it a name like Stage 1. If you follow the book, or we can call it Level 1. I'm going to actually call it Level 1, and we'll click on Save. It'll show up in our Assets folder down here. See that our Level 1. So, we talked about the parent-child objects and the children objects, and how they actually bind to each other. So they, if the main one is at 111 and the child is at 111, then it'll be 111 away from the parent, which is at 111. So the child would actually sit at 222 in the real world, or in the game world. Now, if we put the camera inside any moving object, the camera will follow that object on the scene. For a game, we want to keep the camera fixed. We want it in one place. So because the camera is fixed, we're going to put it in the render game object so that it stays at one location. But remember, any camera that you attach to a moving object will follow that object. And that should finish up their first section. And if you're following along, you can go ahead and go to the next section, which should be adding and displaying a background. Alright, I have actually saved all of these textures that you'll be using into a zip file. Let me throw that up there for you. You can ignore the other files there. I guess I didn't actually zip it. I had it prepared to zip. Okay. So that will take just a tad bit to upload, but that will be a copy of the assets we'll be using. If you're following along in the book, you can also copy the images, or in the tutorial, you can also copy the images from their site. You just right-click the image, save as, or save the image. Right-click and click save the image. Now, we're going to import the images into the texture folder, into the textures folder. Since we don't have a textures folder here, we're going to have to add it. See how we don't have a textures folder right now? So we're just going to click on create, and we're going to create a folder, and we're going to call it textures. And then we can either copy the file into it or drag and drop it from the Explorer. So I'm gonna break this down here a little bit. Minimize this. I want to do this. I'm going to bring that up like that. We'll bring up our assets folder, and we're going to drop the background into the textures. Now I'm actually going to go ahead and just drop all the ones we need. The book will tell us to drop it as we go, but I'm going to do it this way so that we don't run into other issues. Fine. So make me do this in pieces. So we're going to throw all those into the textures, and then we're going to it's making me look like I don't know what I'm doing here. Now, when we go back into Unity after we've dragged and dropped, it will have a little load scene. Now, if we click on textures now, you'll see all of our textures in here that we dropped. If you're following along in the guide and you're actually trying to follow the entire steps as we go, um, you only have access to them as you come to the tutorial unless you download the asset zip, which is now uploaded. All right. Now, sometimes when you import them, they provide different settings. So if you look over here in our inspector, why is everything resized wrong? If you look over in our inspector here, you'll see how you've got different options here. A lot of this is advanced stuff, and you shouldn't need to worry about that at this given moment. But I just wanted to kind of point that out for you. Okay, so in Unity, we're going to create a new game object called a sprite in the scene. So we go up to game object, we're going to create other, and we're going to create a sprite. Does everybody see where I'm at? Okay. Now if you see, we went and took and it automatically took the first object, because that's what I had highlighted, and used it to make my new sprite. Um, in general, it'll be an empty sprite, and you can actually click on the background and drag it up to the sprite to give it that texture. Also, you can click on the sprite, and over here where it says sprite background or sprite, this would be blank if you just made a blank sprite, and you can click on this little dot and it'll bring up a menu where you can select different game objects to select what you want to put there. Unity may have set automatically your background as a sprite to display. If not, or if you want to change the texture, you can go to Inspector and select background. So say we wanted to use the cloud instead, we can select on that and use the cloud, and that's going to be our sprite's image. In this case, we're going to leave it as the background because that's what we want to do. Okay, so is anybody actually following along in their code, or are you just kind of watching and taking notes? So did anybody who's doing the code, did you get your sprite to jump? You jumped ahead. Did your sprite show up? All right. Well, Dallas, this is actually is being recorded, so we'll be able to go ahead and apply. You'll be able to review that and walk back through it if you want to, or you can use the tutorial like Mark is doing to step through. I just want you to kind of be able to see what it's doing as well. Some people can do better with seeing, hearing, and actually doing it at the same time. It helps with the learning process, since those are the three forms of learning. That's all right. Okay, I just want to make sure everybody that it showed up and that we didn't run into any troubles with it. Okay, so now if you look at our scene, you can see the cloud. You can see our cloud background here in our scene. In the hierarchy plane, select the new sprite and rename it. So we're going to rename it to background. Because that's what that sprite is. And actually, they want us to rename it to background 1. So I guess I'll add a 1 to it. Okay. Then move the object to where it belongs, which is under the level 0 background section. So we're going to move it over here. We're going to stick it underneath background. So now it's as a child there. And we're going to make sure that our X, Y, and Z are still set at 0. Okay. Now, what we're going to do is we're actually going to create a second background, and we're going to place it right next to the other one so they line up next side by side. And if we zoom out in our thing, which we can do with the mouse scrolls, which mine's not one to scroll, we can also move around by clicking on the little hand up here. This will allow us to move objects around. This will allow us to rotate objects. And this lets us do a lot of things. I think one is selecting objects like I just did there. We're not going to be doing that. What I want to do is zoom out, but my scroll is not working. Let me try. There we go. So I want to scroll out so I can see that from further away. So we can see that it's right there. Now we're going to do the same thing. We're going to create another. We're going to create another sprite. We're going to have it have the background. So we want to check to see if it's got the. We want to make sure it. See, this second one didn't give us the background. So this time around for our second one, we're going to actually want it to be the background. There's different ways of getting it. We can grab it from our assets, like we just did here. We're clicking on the dot. Or we can actually click on the background and drag it to our sprite, and it'll automatically apply it. Okay? So our second background, our second sprite, we're going to rename. And we're going to actually, I'm going to remove that. That's another way of doing it, but that's not the way the book wants it, or the guide wants us to do it. So I'm going to actually remove that and do it the other way around. And we're going to click on Asset, select Background, and then you can just close this window once you've selected what you want. We're going to rename this one to Background 2. Okay, we're going to move it underneath the 0 background as well. But this time we're going to change some of our variables. We're going to change our X position to 20, and we're going to make everything else 0. And if you look, it lines up and kind of continues the image. Everybody with me? Okay, another way to duplicate an object is to use that Control D we were talking about. So we can actually press the Control button, Control and D, and my system's going to go a little slow on me, make sure I'm still connected. Because Joe, the reason why is because this, the plane and the tiled texture is actually more of a 3D aspect, a 3D environment aspect. This is actually, we're using sprites because sprites are typically what's used in a 2D environment, and allows us to manipulate them a little bit better than planes allow us to do. This is a native 2D function that was added with 4.3. Prior to 4.3, it did not exist. So a lot of people used the plane method during that time. Making a new sprite did not give us the background. We applied, for some reason, the first time around, Unity automatically applied the background image we had to it. The second time around, it didn't apply anything to it. The sprite is just a placeholder for our image. The first time around, I didn't assign the background because Unity did it. The second time around, I did apply it. Any other questions before we continue? Alright, if we want to copy an object, we can also do it with the quick button controls like I was saying. You got to highlight it in the hierarchy, and then you press Control and the D button, and it'll make a copy. See, now I have two of them. Anytime you make a copy this way and you duplicate it, it has the exact same X, Y, and Z positions as the previous one does. Everything is exactly the same. So if we go over here and we change this to 40, you'll see that we actually expanded out even more. Now, you guys don't have to do that because I don't think the book actually goes over that part of it, but I wanted you to see that it just goes ahead and expands it out even, that we can use that to make it more. Now, I do recommend if you duplicate it, it will use the exact same name. So I do recommend changing the name to keep yourself aware of which pieces are what. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and leave that background 3 there. That's not included in the tutorial, and you don't have to do that. I'm just have it there for that purpose. Alright, now we're gonna add some props to the scene. If you see the down in our textures, you can see platforms. That's our next texture. If you're following along in the tutorial, that you can copy that image from their website. We're actually going to end up creating 2 sprites with this one image. Okay, so we have our texture, we have our image in the texture folder. So we're going to click on our platforms here, so it's highlighted like this. And we're going to go to the inspector over here. See this inspector the inspector is the side spot here. And we're going to change our sprite mode to multiple. See how it says sprite mode single? We're going to select multiple. That means that the image has multiple sprites in it we're going to use. Okay, then we can click on the sprite editor, the little button down here, so that we can declare what parts are, what sprite is what sprite. Okay, in the new window, in the sprite editor window, you can draw rectangles around each object, a platform, to slice the texture into smaller pieces, or smaller parts. The top left button slice allows you to quickly and automatically make that a lot easier. So we can do automatic, and that brings up things. You'll find objects inside the image, and it will automatically Unity will automatically find the objects and create each separate sprite based on that aspect. You can specify the default pivot point or set a minimum scale for a slice. For a simple image without artifacts, it's really efficient. However, if you use this tool, be careful and check the results to make sure it gets what you want. So if we hit this and hit slice, apparently it doesn't do anything. Okay, it's made 2 little slices. It made something here, but this is not what we want. See that? That little square. So we're not going to be using that slice. We're going to need to create our own slice because we want our sprites. And then you can sit here and you can edit it and move its pivot point somewhere else if you don't want it in the center. We'll go ahead and get this one here separated. Okay, and so we have our sprites. And I do know why we have it's saying 9. Oops. I can have it. Okay. It's going to be a pain in the butt on me. We're going to adjust this a little bit because we want to make sure we get all of our image in there. Do this one down here. Bring it up just a tad bit more. Like so. Okay. Once you have that selected, once you've got that in the place you want, we have platform 0 is what it's called it, and the book wants us to call it platform 1 and 2. So we're going to call this platform 1, and we're going to call this one platform 2. All right. Now underneath the image file, which I don't understand what you're saying there. Now under the image file, you should see two sprites separately. Oh, we have to click on apply. If we don't click on apply, that doesn't work, and I don't think they tell you to do that. So now if we click on this little arrow here beside the platform, you'll see we have two separate platforms underneath it. See that? Everybody with me? Of course, tutorials are never really good about explaining step by step where we go. That's why we're going to do it. Why we're doing it this way. Okay. So now we're going to do the same thing we did before. We're going to create two sprites, and we're going to apply our platform 1 to one and our platform 2 to the other. So we're going to apply our platform 1, and you can drag it over here as well to that sprite. Object, we're going to create another sprite, and we're going to attach platform 2 to that one. I'm going to name these. Let's see where they actually tell you to name them, but I'm going to name these platform 1 and platform 2. And for naming's sake, I'm actually going to name the actual objects with a capital instead of a lowercase. That way they're not getting confused with other objects. Okay, now we're going to move the platforms into our middle ground group. Okay, now we need to make sure our platforms are still at 0. We want to have, or for the Z position, we can leave the X and Y's alone for now. And we can actually move them around if we wanted to. We can grab the object. We can select the objects in our hierarchy and move them around. Oops. Like so. Okay? But we want to make sure our Z stays at 0. We're moving in our X and Y plane now. And we're in our middle group. Everything got put into our middle group. Alright, everybody still with me? Alright. Now we're actually going to save our platforms as prefabs so we can drag and drop them. So we just take and drag and drop them into the prefabs folder. Now we don't have a prefabs folder, so we're going to have to make that one. Remember? We're going to create a folder, a new folder, and we don't want to do it in textures. Apparently I did it in textures, so I'm going to delete that. Remember, if you delete any assets out of Unity, it permanently deletes them. So just be aware of that if you are trying to remove an object but don't want to delete the object from your Unity project. We're going to go back up to the Unities folder, and we're going to create a new folder. Okay, we're going to call this one prefab. Okay. Now, to save these as prefabs, why do I have two platforms? Apparently I mistyped something. Okay. To turn these into prefabs, all we're going to have to do is select them and drag them into our prefab folder. Now, we don't, whoops, I didn't want to do that. You want to do them one at a time. For some reason, it doesn't let you do it otherwise. So we're going to drop that platform. And how did I rename it again? Okay, and then we're going to platform 2, and we're going to drop and drag that into our prefab folder. Now we have two prefabs, and notice the color in the hierarchy changes from a black to a dark blue. Does everybody see that? Okay, if it's dark blue, yeah, I think I fixed that. Let me go back and check. Yeah, I fixed that now. For some reason, I had them named wrong, and that created a bit of a problem there. LaDonna, if you want to make the screen bigger and you're just following along and not actually going through the tutorial, you can click on the full screen tab above screen share, and that'll make the screen the whole size of your screen. No problem. Okay, I just wanted you guys to note that it does change colors if it's a prefab. Prefab objects are a dark blue in the hierarchy, and to let you know that those objects are in your prefab folder. Now, with it being a prefab, we're going to be able to create more of them exactly the same way the previous one was. Excuse me. So, you notice the game object that you've converted into a prefab presents a new row of buttons just under its name. When we go over where is it saying that? Oh, okay. I actually think they've I think that might be something that's in a different format, but what they're referring to, okay, over here, the blue ones, you can see that it's a prefab. See the select, revert, and apply. Those are your new sets of buttons. If you modify the game object later, you can apply its changes to the prefab. So if we move platform 1, well, I guess platform 2, it changes the X and Y, and if we hit apply, it applies the new X and Y's to platform 2 down here. See? So you have the same X and Y variables. If you or you can revert it to the prefab properties. So if we move this, now that that's set to that, if we move this here and we want it to go back to the prefab properties and click revert, it should go back. Of course, it's not going to because it didn't work the way I intended it. And that's the way it always ends up being. Anyways, that was the principle behind it. So the revert might actually work in a different way. The select button moves your selection directly to the prefab asset in the project view. it will be highlighted. So if we use select, it brings us to the actual asset in our folder, and it highlights it for us. Did you see that? Everybody see that? Okay. We're now able to add more platforms, change their positions, scales, and planes. So we can put them, you can put some in the background or foreground too. Just make sure the platform Z positions is set to 0. So now we can just take our new platforms and we can place them in the foreground and then move them. So now they're over top of another, over where, you see how our middle ground, foreground, and background are in different positions? Foreground puts us on top. If we move this platform to the background, it should be underneath, and I don't know why it's not going underneath. But we can scale them, make it look like they're further away. We can scale it up a little bit, make it look like it's closer. Drop that one into the foreground, and we can just play that a little bit. And obviously, I'm putting it slightly different than what the book was using. I'm going to take those two prefabs out of here and move them into our middle ground. Keep those in the middle. And I'll put one more here, scale it down a little bit. And we're going to put that into our background. So now it looks like we have, let's scale this one up a little bit. We'll actually move that one to our foreground as well. Okay, so now it actually looks like you've got multiple platforms at different positions in your 2D. And we want to make sure that still want to make sure that when we select each one of these objects, that our Z stayed the same. So even though we scaled them, even though we moved them around, our Z always stayed the same. Okay. Now we're going to create layers. We're going to work with our layers, and you're going to see that more better now, what I was talking about before. We're going to modify our homemade layers to avoid any display order issues. So we're going to simply change the Z position of the game objects in our hierarchy, like we were talking about before, our parent items, so that, and that should change the Z's of every object underneath it. So, for example, we'll change background. We're going to make background at Z10. Okay, so it's further away, and I'm trying to make it 100 for me. We're going to make middle ground at 5, and we're going to leave foreground at 0. Okay? So from here, if we move one of the objects that are in middle ground to a position behind one of the other ones, you can actually see it goes behind now. So if we take one of our background ones, and you can actually see they go behind all of them. Alright, now also, if we switch over to 3D view, you'll be able to, and I don't know why it's on that end, you'll be able to kind of see how they are different layers, how they're sitting in front of each other. And of course it wants to be stupid there. So if we do hand, and we zoom back in, you can kind of see how they are different layers around our object. And don't worry about that cutting. That's because of our camera, our visual clipping. If we switch this back over, and you've seen how I switched from 2D to 3D is right here. We'll switch back over to 2D and bring that out so we can see our path here. Now we're going to add Okay, so now I guess in the older version of theirs, they had explained the long detail, explaining how the cameras and lights and all that stuff work in a 2D game. The good news is that from that aspect is that you don't have to deal with any of that stuff. If you click on the main camera object, you'll see it has a projection flag that's set to orthodontic. So if we click on main camera, you see this projection. It says orthographic. Okay. This is a setting that allows the camera to render a 2D game without taking the 3D into account. Because we have it set on a 2D setup, it automatically set our camera to orthopedic or orthographic nature. So that in our camera preview, you can see here it shows a 2D environment. Unity is still using its 3D engine to render the scene. And you can kind of tell that if you look at it by switching over to 3D, but the camera only sees it in a 2D aspect. Okay, so now we'll be moving on to the next section of the tutorial. Before we do that, let me take any questions, or if anybody has any questions. No problem, Joe, and I'll make sure to try to get this uploaded to everybody at that point. Welcome, David. I see you finally made it. So is everybody still with me? Everybody understanding? David, do you need a refresh jump or? Okay. Also, too, if you want to, David, the tutorial that we're walking through is up above the chat log. It's called the tutorial side scroll shooter. You can download that there. At the end, I will actually post a link in notes so that everybody can see that in notes during the recording. Okay. So now we're gonna move on to the next one if nobody else has any questions. So at this point, we've created a background and we've created a multi-level background with some obstacles, basically some platforms that are in the way, or that are in our scene. So now we are going to create our player. So a player controllable entity needs some elements. It needs a sprite. We're going to need to be able to see where our character is going. And it needs to be able to interact with the world. It needs to be allowed to interact with the world. So first thing we're going to need to do is we're going to create our sprite. I've already uploaded that, so if we go into textures, you'll see the player sprite here. If you're following along in the tutorial, you'll have to right-click on the image in the tutorial and download. And then apply that to your texture folder. We're going to create a new sprite. So create other sprite. We're going to call this sprite player. Okay, so then we have of course it didn't save it. Make sure you hit enter afterwards if you're writing inside these things, or else it doesn't save it. Okay, while we're in here, we can see all these, and we want to make sure that we select the sprite to display the sprite property of the sprite render component. So we want to make sure that's there is set to our we want to make sure our sprite component is set to our character. Now if we click on the little link there, we can go this way, or we can actually click in here and just click and drag that into our sprite slot. Okay, so now we have we want to place the player in the foreground layer. So the player is always in the front. So the player should always, if we click on the player and we move it around, it should always end up being in the top. Alright, see how it's on top of everything? Right now, what we're going to actually do is move it into the foreground section. And it should still end up being on top of everything, even the ones that are already in foreground, because it's just going to draw over top of them. So we can see that. Now, the problem is it's a bit big. So we're going to scale it down a little bit. We're actually going to scale our x and y variables, and we're going to make it 0.2. I put 0.2. So we're going to make it 0.2, and now you can see it's kind of squished right now because we've only scaled the x. But if we change our y back, we're going to scale it down.